Oh, what do you think, Christian?
Oh, I think Trudeau is playing a very dangerous and disingenuous game. It really was underhanded, what he did. And, you know, he's putting Canadian workers in, frankly, extreme danger. The administration has been talking about further sanctions under Section 232. These are sanctions taken to protect key strategic industries. We've already used them on steel and aluminum. There was talk about auto and auto parts tariffs in addition, but that was, perhaps a year ahead. And then I think you're now going to see that accelerated dramatically. If you add Canada's auto exports to the United States plus auto parts, you get to about $64 billion. That's 4% of Canada's GDP that just got overnight put at risk because of what Justin Trudeau did. Canada, about 25% of its GDP is tied to trade with the United States, whereas only 2% of our GDP is. We have the influence here. They have a bunch of tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade, including on lumber, that just are unfair and need to be equalized. So, I think takeaway from this is I think NAFTA is in serious trouble. I think it's more likely we're going to make a bilateral deal with Mexico and then make a bilateral deal with Canada if they're willing to negotiate.
Christian, this goes to my first question. It's Dagan McDowell again about Mike Pompeo and presenting the message from the Trump administration in a measured way. There is only one President Trump. And when you have his surrogates and people who work within the White House going out and saying things like there's a special place in hell for foreign leaders who don't negotiate in good faith, is that more hurtful than helpful? Again, we've seen it with Rudy Giuliani and the comments that he made about Kim Jong-un. He's representing the president in this special counsel investigation. He's talking about the North Korea summit. So again, does there need to be a more concise, careful, measured message out of this White House?
Well, no, I think that was very concise. And what Kudlow and Navarro said yesterday, we don't have any special information for you, but I don't think they would have said those things without very clear guidance that came from Air Force One. Those two gentlemen are thought to be on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to trade, where Kudlow is the trade dove, who is a little closer to the establishment, and Navarro wants a lot of change and is a trade hawk, but they had the same message. And really, I think it is, and frankly, we heard this a little bit from Secretary of Pompeo, basically saying, okay, yes, the Europeans are doing good things, but frankly, they're doing it outside of the context of the G7. The G7, I think, has served its purpose and should go into history. It emerged in the 1970s in the wake of the breakdown of the Bretton Woods financial agreement. It was supposed to get rich capitalist countries together to do things. Well, aside from beating us up on trade at this G7, the other topics were climate change and gender equality. This does not justify the massive expense in the time of 7 leaders or 8 if we get Russia back in to do these things. So, I think a little candor is okay.
I mean, do you agree that he stabbed the U.S. in the back?
Absolutely. Negotiating in bad faith and acting meekly while he was up there and signaling that, okay, maybe we can reach an agreement. Frankly, the Canadians have been negotiating in bad faith. They know that we want changes to NAFTA, dragging their feet. Also, it's really infuriating to the White House that they're engaged in a lobbying campaign. I mean, if you talk about foreign influence on lobbying our governors and state legislatures.
I just want to point out that Peter Navarro borrowed a phrase from Madeleine Albright that she used on the campaign trail when she was campaigning for Hillary Clinton. That was the first thing that made my ears burn.
There's a place in hell for people
the place
who don't
in hell for women.
Support women. Yeah.
Right. So that again, words matter, Lee.
Right.
Words do matter. And one of the things that I am really interested to see is how people react to it this week, because I know that a lot of people going into these negotiations were very favorable to the president. Were really hopeful that things were going to get done, that he was going to really fight for the American worker. On the other hand, I'm not sure that some of this language and rhetoric isn't going to make people very nervous, and I don't know what that's going to mean going into the midterms for these independent voters that swing both ways. Do you think it's going to have an impact?
Well, I got to say, people, when Ronald Reagan went to the Berlin Wall and said, tear down this wall, all of the experts thought that was terribly provocative. All of his own National Security Council, his own Secretary of State said, you can't go and say that. The speechwriter snuck it in and Reagan kept it in. So I think, this candid talk, Canada really has a good deal.
But that's
they have 270%
about a wall,
tariffs.
Not about a person. I mean, to say tear down the wall is one thing, not going after somebody's character.
Well, again, but Trudeau has been negotiating in bad faith with this, and also using disingenuous arguments.
Okay.
I mean, talking about the steel tariffs that we have put on to defend industries that we want here for strategic purposes, flipping that around, saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Canada is not going to attack the U.S. We don't pose a military threat." Well, that's just not addressing the topic, really, and trying to rally Macron, and that's another thing. Also, sort of the idea that the G7 is unified against us. You saw the picture where it looked like a contentious moment between Merkel and Trump, and actually Prime Minister Abe of Japan looked like, frankly, he was a lot more on Trump's side and more skeptical of whatever it was Merkel was saying. Very notably, the Italian president came out and supported President Trump on adding Russia back to the G8, and I think there is basically this usual attempt by France, Germany, and Canada's current left-wing government. They think they can browbeat Donald Trump into backing off of what he needs to do and wants to do on trade. I think that was a miscalculation on their part, and the people who are unfortunately going to pay the worst price are Canadian workers, manufacturing employees.
Wow. All right. A lot of body language there. Christian, thanks very much for weighing in. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
We'll
Great to
see
be
you
here.
soon. Christian Whiton joining us there.